Hello, everyone. I'm Vassilis Koliatsos, chair of the board of the Society for the Preservation of Greek Heritage. I'm taping this introduction for the event on the fate of Greek monuments in Asia Minor and the Middle East that took place at the Solgrave Club in Washington, D.C. on November 15th. Unfortunately, because of technical glitches, my introduction was not recorded at the time. This was a very special event for us. First, it launched our return to live events in Washington 2.5 years or so after the onset of the pandemic. Second, taking on the big issue of Greek monuments, I feel is a birthright of our society. SPGH was founded in the mid-1970s explicitly for the purpose of protecting and restoring monuments. Although obviously we have significantly evolved over the 50 years of our existence to our current emphasis on culture and identity. But today's theme encompasses all our key priorities through the years. Third, with that event, we offered what we thought would be a fitting, if we can use that word, perspective on the 100th anniversary of the tragic ending of the ancient Greek communities in Asia Minor, where in fact the Greek civilization was born with the work of so many philosophers, scientists, and poets, all ending with the retreat of the Greek army and going up in flames with the burning of Smyrna. That was a sequel, that event was a sequel to another important event that had taken place in March with one of our panelists, Professor Prodromou. This event that you can find on our website was on the momentous reversal of the status of Hagia Sophia, and after that, the Hora Church, from religious museums to mosques in the summer of 2020. Our sense of urgency on this matter, but also our sense of urgency on the rather lackadaisical response led to our decision to put the issues in front of a live audience. This recorded event is centered around the endangerment of Greek monuments in troubled regions of the world that used to be part of the Greek dominion. And here, I mean various permutations of Greek dominion, even within foreign state entities and empires. These monuments saw unprecedented glory in different periods of Greek history, yet today they are in a state of abandonment and often in grave peril. In this recording, you will hear from three distinguished panelists. Professor Elizabeth Prodromou, who is a return speaker in our events, is faculty director of the Initiative on Religion, Law, and Diplomacy at the Fletcher School of Tufts, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Director Flora Karagianni heads the European Center for Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Monuments, an organization that is overseen by the Hellenic Ministry of Culture in Thessaloniki, Greece. Professor Evangelos Kyriakides, is director of the heritage management organization Heritage, in capital letters, a private organization aiming to promote good practice in the management of heritage around the world through education and research. The three panelists have, to a considerable extent, complementary expertise and exposure to the subject, and they will contribute important and variable points of view. The way this is playing itself is I lay out three thematics that I ask our panelists to address, and then the panel opens up to general discussion. Thank you very much. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Vassilis, for this very, very impressive and honorary for me introduction. I'm really very glad. I really feel very glad to be with you in this night. The topic is very interesting. I am connecting with you from Delphi. I feel very, very happy for this. In a few hours, our Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, along with the General Director of UNESCO, André Azoulay, will open a conference on the celebrating the 5th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. And the topic of this conference is the future of World Heritage in challenging times, enhancing resilience and sustainability. So, speaking about challenging times, I really feel very, very honored to be with you. Indeed, giving the floor to an archaeologist is a real challenge because it passed me the opportunity to share with you a lot of, slides at least, as well as a lot of thoughts about this cultural conservation issue, the moments of truth, as you very, very nice put it in the title of this event. Being a Greek archaeologist, I should really mention and say that even from the very, very early period of times, that is at least from the 8th century BC, our Greek civilization has been extremely expanded in a very huge area, covering the Black Sea, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, as you can see on the map. And this situation continued during the next centuries, during the classical period of the 5th century, as well as during the major period of the Hellenistic world. That was the period when Alexander the Great really conquered all this huge territory from the east to west, covering almost 26 countries in modern terms, of course, countries in modern terms, and distributed whatever we call Greek spirit and civilization in all this surface of the world. Of course, the situation continued the same, and during the next periods, that is during the Roman period and the early Christian period, the Greek civilization, the Greek culture continued to be very vivid, and it remained also in Byzantine era as the major characteristic of a whole civilization that lasted 11 centuries, from 330 up to the middle of the 15th century, when Constantinople fell under the Turks, the Ottoman Turks. The crucial question is what has been left nowadays from the ancient Greek and Byzantine world in Asia Minor and the Middle East. Allow me now to tell you something that I'm sure you all know, that what has been left is numerous archaeological sites, cities and castles, villas, that is private secular buildings, very, very often covered with exquisite mosaics, as well as a lot of early Christian and Byzantine ecclesiastical monuments, churches, as well as monasteries. Starting from Asia Minor, I would really be so glad to present you here some, at least a sample of this amazing cultural heritage that is preserved in Turkey, and it is 100%, of course, connected with our civilization, our culture as Greeks. Not to mention, starting to mention Troia, the famous city of antiquity that is mentioned in Homerus' works. Of course, continuing with other sites of the Asia Minor coast, such as Ephesus, this very, very famous ancient city that is the most visited site in the whole country, and in which one can really see and admire and visit many, many kinds of buildings, secular, religious buildings, private buildings, such as the houses covered with frescoes, or even the castle, the Byzantine castle of the city. Continuing with other cities such as Pergamon, the ancient Greek Pergamos, where one can really see and admire the ancient theater, as well as many other places and buildings of the ancient city. I just focus on the issue of the theaters because it is considered to be among the first buildings, constructions that are built upon the establishment of a city. From Pergamon, you all know the case of the altar of Zeus that is preserved in the Museum of Pergamon that has been built in Berlin, decorated with a very impressive sculpture inspired by the Greek mythology. Of course, a lot of other sites are nowadays preserved in Asia Minor coast, totally connected with the ancient Greek colonies, such as Priene, as you can see, or even Miletus. And of course, a series of mosaic floors that have been unearthed, uncovered during several excavations that have been conducted from the beginning of the 20th century onwards. In the case of Antioch, the ancient city of Syria, that nowadays belongs under the jurisdiction of Turkey. In Antioch, one can visit this museum of mosaics, and I should tell you that they are really very impressive, astonishing, I could say. The majority of them are inspired by the Greek mythology and bear inscriptions such as here Amerimnia or Soteria or Episkepsis or Megalopsychia, as you can see here, Greek words related to some deities of the ancient world. On the other hand, also in Turkey, in the southern part of the country, one can see that the case of Zeugma, a very famous city of mosaics, where very recently a lot of impressive mosaics, such as the one on the right, where you can see the 9 muses, or you can have a look of some of the excavations of the city. Wherever they excavate in order to build something, they are facing antiquities, ancient Greek antiquities, villas mainly, fully covered with very impressive mosaics, such as the ones that I present you here. And of course, these mosaics, such as the Andromeda and Perseus, totally connected with the Greek mythology, are really the biggest testimony of the Greek presence in this territory. Since we are in a connection with all our colleagues in Turkey, and we are participating in the same conferences and symposia, we very often see them, hear them presenting new findings coming to light every day from excavations that are conducted in the country. And in these excavations, they really uncover a lot of findings: Greek inscriptions, sculpture, terracottas, even frescoes, mosaics. As you can see here, this very recent finding of a mosaic having as a theme the sacrifice of Iphigenia. And in many other cases, I just present you here a small sample with coming from several sites in the hinterland as well as in the coast. And not only, of course, ancient Greek antiquities, but also early Christian, such as the ones that I present you here, where again one can really read the inscriptions that covered the floors of the basilicas. On the other hand, beside the sites, the major sites, when one can really see all these antiquities, in all Asia Minor, as I said in the beginning, one can really find a lot of land walls, a lot of fortification systems that have been totally erected and constructed during the Byzantine era, starting and having as a prototype the walls of Constantinople, of the capital of the Byzantine Empire, where even today there are preserved numerous inscriptions on the towers of the land walls of the city. I just present you here some detailed photos that I have taken during one of my excursions in the city. The inscriptions really mention the emperors during which the towers have been erected. A lot of inscriptions and a lot of references on these Byzantine emperors, of course, all of them written in Greek, since Greek was the official language of the Byzantine Empire for 11th centuries, almost. Of course, these land walls that protected the historic peninsula where the capital of the empire was developed became an example, a prototype that really influenced all the defensive systems of the empire. So all over the Asia Minor, one can really, even today, visit sites and see impressive castles as well as urban centers fortified by impressive fortification walls. I just present you here the case of Trebizond, the case of Iznik, Nikia, Sinop here, or Giresun, or Samsun, or even several places. I just focus on, you can see on the left part of the slide, the case of Ankara, in which, in the capital, I mean, or in the modern capital of Turkey, one can really admire the Byzantine fortifications of the ancient and Byzantine city of Ankara, which even today, as you can understand, bears its Greek name, Ankara, inspired by the anchor. Besides the fortifications, a lot of ecclesiastical monuments. Again, Constantinople was the prototype, the Cathedral Church of Hagia Sophia, that influenced the development of the architecture, of the ecclesiastical architecture for almost 15 centuries. In the city of Constantinople, there are preserved the most exquisite examples of Byzantine sculpture, such as here in the church of St. Serios and Vakchos, or marble floors covered with colored marble plaques, such as here in Studios Monastery, or even churches and monasteries, Catholicon of monasteries, that really bear specific architectural types that they were built in several architectural types that again really consist landmarks in the history of architecture. All these churches and monasteries were covered with mosaic on the walls, such as here on the dome, or in exquisite, impressive frescoes, such as here in the Chora Monastery. And of course, Constantinople itself, as I said, became the prototype that has been multiplied in several other cases, such as in Trebizond, which became the capital of the homonymous empire, in which again there is preserved this very important monastery on the wisdom of God, on Hagia Sophia, covered, decorated with impressive sculpture, as well as with the impressive frescoes of the 13th century. A series of monasteries have been erected in the whole country. Here I just present you one, the Soumela Monastery in Pontos area, which for many Greeks originated from Pontos, is the most important monastery that really attracts every year millions of people going there and offering their respect to the Holy Mother, which is venerated in this monastery. In many other cases, such as Iznik, cathedrals named after the Hagia Sophia of Constantinople were built and are preserved even today. They are standing monuments that one can really visit, such as the case of Hagia Sophia, as you can see, and of course the case of Cappadocia, one of the most impressive sites of Turkey, included in UNESCO list, and one of the most important sites internationally, 100% connected with the Byzantine past, that is connected with the hundreds of monasteries decorated with these impressive frescoes. And of course, the situation is the same in the Middle East, in Syria, where one can visit or could visit in the past sites like Palmyra or Bosra, included again in UNESCO list. Even nowadays, 2 months ago, this very impressive mosaic depicting the Trojan War has been unearthed. As you can see, it's like a Bible, like a book with all these depictions of the heroes of the war. And of course, not only Syro-Palestine area, but also Jordan, or even, I just skip some slides because I would like to present you even the cases of Madaba or of Petra, where you can all see by yourself all these inscriptions or in Greek, covering the mosaic floors of many monuments. Going now to the northern part of Africa, one can really see again the Greco-Roman museum in Alexandria, not to mention the famous library that is even today the major landmark of the city. In Libya, the cities, the ancient Greek cities that continued their work, their life in the Roman period and in the early Christian period are nowadays visible. Now, since we said in the beginning that it is the time, the moment of truth, we should make some remarks. The first one being that it is not by accident that all of these sites that are, not all, but the majority of these sites that are included in national heritage in many countries, starting from Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, etc., are included in UNESCO World Heritage List since they gather all these criteria of the quality of the antiquities and of their importance. The case of Turkey is very distinctive, indicative of the very big value of the ancient Greek and Byzantine sites. You can see this is the list of the Turkish, let's say, sites that are included in UNESCO. Half of them are sites totally connected with the Greek and Byzantine civilization and culture. Not to mention that in Turkey, millions of tourists visit all these sites per year, and as I said earlier, Ephesus, for example, or Hagia Sophia, some years ago before its conversion, I mean, was the most visited sites of the whole country. Now, why this cultural heritage is in danger? This is something that we very often discuss in the archaeological symposia, as well as in a lot of fora or in several discussions. They suffer these monuments from several factors, either from abandonment, or from destruction, or from the shift of their character, or from the illicit trafficking. In the cases of abandonment, I just present you only a slide here showing that the case of the walls of Constantinople. On the left, you can see a photo taken in 1870, whereas the photo on the right, which is again of the landworks, is a modern photo taken some years ago. As you can see, the situation is almost the same 1 century after. Of course, a lot of monasteries and churches in Turkey are abandoned after the beginning of the 20th century, where the Greeks left and came to Greece after, the Asia Minor campaign. So this is a very, very crucial factor, the abandonment of the monasteries. And of course, as you can understand, if us being Greeks are not interested in order to preserve them and to restore them, nobody will do that. The bad restorations is also another very crucial topic. A lot of Byzantine and ancient Greek monuments that are included in projects of restoration in several other countries are not restored so well because the colleagues who undertake these projects in those countries do not have the know-how and do not know the history of architecture in order to try to imitate as better as they can the original faces. And you can see the worst example here, the walls of Constantinople. They have been restored, partly restored in the land walls in a case that they recall Lego than Byzantine fortifications. The conversion into mosques, another very, very difficult issue, another very bad development of our era. It is the case of Constantinople, which is the most well-known because it happened in our days, almost 2 years ago, that had as a result the covering of the mosaics on the walls. But Hagia Sophia in Constantinople was not the only one. We have also other cases, such as Hagia Sophia in Trebizond, where you can see that almost a box has been built on the nave, and the frescoes of the church are covered by curtains, as you can see here, in order not to be seen during the prayer. And of course, Hagia Sophia in Enos, in Enes, or in Iznik, you can see all of them are converted into mosques, not to mention the case of Hora Monastery, the most impressive total of mosaics that are included in this monument, and they are supposed to be covered because we are waiting, according to the announcement of the of the President Erdogan, that the monastery will be functioning as a mosque and not as a museum as it was until recently. The destruction is another case. The most famous one is the case of Palmyra, but not only this. You can see here a lot of destruction in museums, in monuments, in archaeological sites. These are photos taken by me during a project of documentation before the war in the case of Syria, and you can see how all these have been destroyed, partly or totally, like the ones that you see here. A lot of bad examples and a lot of cases in which UNESCO really included the sites that were under the World Heritage List in the list of World Heritage in danger. This is the case of Syrian sites as well as in the Libyan 5 World Heritage sites that were put in the list of World Heritage in danger. And I will end my presentation with this illicit trafficking, which is another very important and very bad development that really puts in danger a lot of archaeological ancient Greek and Byzantine sites. Is there anything we can do? A very, very serious question. Of course, there is. And the answer is to undertake initiatives in several directions. Of course, to the countries involved, but not only to the countries, but also to the international organizations such as UNESCO, ICOM, and ICROM, or work with local communities. I will insist, and I will end my presentation with this issue: the education of locals in a way that they will learn how to love and protect the cultural heritage is a very crucial issue, and this is the key for everything that has to do with the protection of the cultural heritage I'm just presenting you here some examples of Syria where we worked as a European Center of Byzantine Antiquities. We really worked with the locals in order to make them understand the value of our culture and the importance of its preservation. That's it. Thank you very much for your patience. I would really like to say many other things. The cases are many, and I'm really looking forward for this discussion that can really follow this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for everyone also for coming out. I know this is the first post-COVID event of the SPGH, so it's a pleasure to be part of that and also to welcome Evangelos from Athens. I want to say a little bit, I want to take a step back. I think Flora's presentation was really just so remarkable and compelling and powerful because it was a tour de force. Yes, it was long, but it was a tour de force, and that's why it was long. It reminds us of the just extraordinary footprint of Greek civilization and culture. And here we're talking about cultural heritage. I'd like to remind us of heritage both in terms of tangible heritage and intangible heritage. Hers was a kind of kaleidoscopic review of the extraordinary geography of Greek cultural heritage over the ages, from antiquity through Byzantium up to the present. And I think that's something for all of us who, at least for me as a political scientist and someone who was engaged in diplomacy, I don't have that scope of knowledge. To see that imagery, I think, is really important for us in order to take a step back from, the focus on perhaps Greece today and to go broad, okay? And I think that, for me, was especially useful. And here I'll get then to what I think is the first important point for all of us in thinking about cultural heritage. Education, awareness, and action. And I will say here the intersection of history, the intersection of geopolitics, and also the intersection of human rights and what I work a lot on, religious freedom. All of those are encompassed in this category of heritage. This is, you mentioned at the beginning, we're at an important inflection point, 2022, 2023. And here I go to history and the importance of remembering and also recognizing the way in which history is weaponized and utilized for purposes of cultural heritage, either preservation or destruction. So after all, 22 and 23 mark the centennial of the event of the Great Catastrophe, which for Greek civilization and for Greeks around the world, for anyone who remembers and is aware of it, is a moment of tragedy indeed. It marks the expulsion and the beginning of a century under the current Republic of Turkey of systematic erasure of the remnants, what's left of living Greek civilization and sites as well. But it's celebrated in Turkey as a moment of victory. And I wanted to read you a speech, for example, on Turkish Armed Forces Day, which is August 30th, okay? Turkey's current president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he reminded the Turkish people of Greece's defeat in 1922. And of course, we need to put this, and here's geopolitics, within the context of the upcoming elections in Turkey in 2023. He reminded the Turkish public of the Greeks' defeat with what the Greeks call the Asia Minor catastrophe. And he also said, he warned in a speech that he gave where? In Samsun, Black Sea, okay? So dates, places, the activization, the weaponization of history. He said, we have one thing to say to Greece. Remember Izmir, okay? So we're at an important inflection point in terms of 1922 and 1923. What's 23, of course? The signing of the Treaty of Lausanne, which the current Turkish government says needs to be abrogated. So history matters for how we think about heritage, both sites, places, and living communities. And history matters because here in that one comment of Erdogan, we put that within the context of contemporary geopolitics and a Turkey which is a revisionist power and which the government in Ankara has said publicly, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Defense uses maps to underscore their discourse. They don't recognize Greece's sovereignty over its Aegean Islands and Western Thrace. So if we start from heritage in this kind of rich tapestry that Flora has presented to us, we then can see how history and geopolitics intersect with remembering, protecting heritage, and sustaining heritage, and sharing heritage, which presumably, as she rightly pointed out, and I think, Evangelos, you will underscore, is not only the heritage of Greeks, it's the heritage of the world, and it's also the heritage of the current country of Turkey. And how to message that and how to make people appreciate that and actually support it and buy into it, I think is something that should preoccupy all of us. So I say that. And the other thing I would like to say is, you know, for those in this room and for the SPGH, we're talking about Greek heritage, but why does what's happening in Asia Minor or in today's Turkey, why does it matter beyond that? Yes, it's world heritage, but it matters because ignoring what's happened to that heritage and the four worst practices, and Evangelos, you'll tell us about best practices, but the four of the worst practices when it comes to heritage preservation, ignoring what's happening allows it to be repeated. And here in the title of this evening's gathering was Christian sites and Christian heritage in the Middle East. And again, Flora touched on some of these, but I wanted to talk about other examples, in particular, Cyprus and Turkish-occupied Cyprus, which is part of the European Union, but stands at the cross-section of 3 continents, including Asia Minor. If we think about what's happened to cultural heritage sites in occupied Cyprus, I wanted to share some basic data, okay? In occupied Cyprus, more than 40 churches are used today by the Turkish occupation authorities as military depots, as dormitories, as barns and stables. I don't know how many of you have visited the occupied section. My father, okay, Nico Larigakis in the back has. My father, Osichoremenos, has passed away, was from Cyprus. I have gone twice to the occupied section, once as a US diplomat and once as a private citizen. To speak about heritage, we must see heritage. And so to see sites that are sacred sites, or whether religious or cultural, turned into public toilets, turned into stockyards, turned into military sites, this is an insult to all humanity. And it's something that we need to be aware of, but then we need to think of, okay, so what can we do constructively? Because we can all lament, but we all also have to think of, are we indifferent? We're complicit if we're indifferent. Yeah, and then what can we do in terms of action? So there's this case of Cyprus. There's the case of there's the case of what's happened with ISIS actions in Syria and Iraq, where Christian sites and pre-Christian sites, but certainly Christian sites, have been deliberately desecrated and destroyed. There are cases in Jordan, etc. So if we're silent about what's happened with Greek heritage sites in Turkey and in Turkish-occupied Cyprus, we're creating the permissive conditions for that to be done to other heritage sites, Greek sites in other parts of the Middle East, Christian sites in other parts of the Middle East, but not only Christian or Greek sites. This is happening to Alevi sites in Turkey. It's happening to Baha'i sites in Iran. It's happening to Yazidi sites in Iraq. It's happened to Jewish sites in Iraq and in other parts of the region. So again, it's the canary in the coal mine scenario. We need to be aware and we need to think about how to take action, because what happens to Greek heritage and cultural heritage is happening to others. And it's the multiplier effect. It's the bully in the schoolyard effect who gets away with something. So I think that for those interested in Greek heritage and here tonight, cultural heritage, we have a special responsibility not only to the past, but also to thinking about how to do a better future, and also a responsibility to others who are also experiencing a similar phenomenon. And I'll stop there. So remembering dates, history, weaponization of those things, and also multiplier effects. And these all are occurring now within the context of geopolitics.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. In fact, you've fast forwarded to additional points, which is terrific, actually. It's a great spawn. So Koliatsos, your turn to give us your comments and your experiences for up to 10 minutes, the most.
Yep. Okay.
Actually, I would like you specifically, though, to address some of the more subtle aspects of the current situation.
Okay.
Some of the methods you use in your training programs and so on, but particularly not on the scientific side, but how can they reveal some of the more hidden aspects or the extent of the problem, but also the intersection between monument destruction or neglect and the livelihood of communities, what these things mean to communities. These two things in particular.
Okay, so I'll try. So I would like to start with some general questions. I'm not going to answer, but the questions are enough to kind of make us think. And then I will go a little bit more into what constitutes violence towards heritage, because that is actually worth thinking about as well. So we are here invited by a great society for the preservation of Greek heritage in the year that its founder passed, Kostas Karas. And we are thinking about Greek heritage. Obviously, there is a lot of us are thinking about Christian heritage. But I would just like to mention that what Greek heritage is has changed its definition through the ages. And what we consider today Greek heritage was not what was considered Greek heritage in the 19th century. It was not what was considered Greek heritage in the 4th century AD. And it was not what was considered Greek heritage in the 2nd century BC. I would just like to ask, where do we stop in what we consider Greek or Greek-related heritage? For example, are Buddhist monuments Greek heritage? The Buddhas that you saw exploding in Afghanistan were inspired by Greek heritage, and they were done by kingdoms that had Greek as their official language, that were calling themselves Greeks. Greek monks, Greek Buddhist monks, left from that kingdom of Kush to go and proselytize into Buddhism, southern India and Sri Lanka. Is that Greek heritage? Is the University of Samarkand, the 3 madrasas where Greek philosophy was taught to the whole of Central Asia, Greek heritage? The mausoleums of some of the greatest Turkish leaders that have Socrates all over the place, are they Greek heritage? Are Mevlevi temples, Sufi temples, who are Neoplatonist, Greek heritage? Is Islam Greek heritage? It's the most Platonic religion of all. There are more Platonic experts in Islamic countries than in the West. Is that Greek heritage? So how far are we prepared to go? And how open-minded are we? Do we consider Muslim Greeks Greeks? Is the first Prime Minister of Tunisia Greek? Is the founder of the city of Cairo Greek? Are 3 or 4 sultans Greek? These are big questions, actually, that I would encourage us to be quite inclusive. I do not want to claim that all of this is only Greek, but like previous people said, this heritage belongs to the local communities, which it absolutely does. There are many stakeholders in heritage, and we must not exclude them. But at the same time, we should not neglect the effect, the impact of Greek thought, of Greek philosophy, of Greek ideas, of Greek art, to a lot of parts of the world that at the time considered themselves Greek. So this is one great area. And of course, ownership of heritage is very important, because obviously Greeks do not own Greek heritage because they don't have the power to protect it, and they do not have the power to destroy it. But Greeks are interested in Greek heritage, and they can raise awareness about Greek heritage, and they can raise awareness, as very well does the topic of this meeting, wants to think more about, raise awareness about the destruction of Greek heritage, because we should not forget that Greek heritage is the heritage of the world, like a lot of other heritage, and so we must really make sure to safeguard it and protect it. Okay, so this is general. I want to go to more specific, and I want to go more to violence. I want you to think that most of the heritage that we're talking about has been around for several hundred, if not several thousands of years. So when we're thinking about violence towards heritage, we have to think about other things. So violence does not mean what the pictures we saw the Islamic State doing, hammering down monuments. Violence is also doing this, doing nothing. So if you decide that you're not going to protect something, this is violence towards heritage. Because if you know that the building is going to fall apart in 30 years and you don't do anything to protect it, this is violence towards heritage. Silencing is violence. So if you say that, if you never mention that something is important, if you never mention that something is relevant, if you never mention that something is Greek, is violence towards heritage. Animosity in the public domain is violence towards heritage. So speeches like what you heard, when you are recalling history and you're using history as an enemy to people and their backgrounds, is violence towards heritage. Bureaucracy can be an enemy and violence towards heritage. So as many of you that may come from Asia Minor know, you cannot claim back your properties very easily because they've got lots of mistakes and people cannot do anything about it. I can tell you, we spent 2 years of voluntary time to clear out and correct the documents of the Syriac Christian community around Mardin, because none of their monuments were recorded properly and they couldn't claim them. So this is violence towards heritage, and it's purposeful too. Political manipulation for foreign policy is violence. So if you are restoring a monument only to use it for a particular foreign policy event, is actually violence towards heritage, because you're destroying what this site stands for just so that you can exploit it for a particular reason. And I'm not saying that one particular country is actually doing this, everybody is doing this. And so we really have to make sure that, first of all, we are correct towards heritage, and then we raise awareness about these issues elsewhere. And then I stop with one thing. Managing expectations can be violence towards heritage. So if you ask an Armenian in France how their religion and heritage is protected, they might come with a very long list of complaints, okay? If you ask an Armenian in Turkey about their complaints about cultural heritage, they might come with a much shorter list, much more meaningful list perhaps, but much shorter list. And this is because their expectations of what they might achieve from that are much lower. So people like Greeks who like to, raise awareness and talk a lot about heritage, and, they are quite passionate about it, they might have much less expectations of what they might achieve in one country versus another country. So looking at the expectations of people is revealing attitudes towards heritage as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miguel. Now, I'd like to first of all say that some of the topics you raised actually are going to be also addressed in the two last thematics. Thematic number 2 is exactly not what Turkey does or undoes, or what UNESCO does or doesn't do, but what we do for our monuments. And permit me to actually make a commentary, because as SPGH we really struggled with this, we fought for it, we advocated, so we had a little bit of a position. So for us, as a heritage society, the value of the monument is not necessarily only the place in a museum or as a sightseeing experience, but the role in one's identity. Identity that's been evolving over centuries in the case of visual lighting, actually. And this aspect of identity is actually accompanied by a sense of ownership. In psychoanalysis, we call it self-object. It's like your heart, your liver, is something they take it away, you're not the same person. That's exactly what it is. It's a self-object. But also a spirit of sacrifice. You're willing to fight and give blood to preserve your heart, something of you. One of our mottos at SPGH is this famous citation of Seferis from Koliatsos' memoirs, this legendary general in the Great War of Independence. He saw his soldiers cutting up some marbles or statues. And he told them, he actually writes in his memoirs, I took the soldiers aside and told them, you cannot give these things away, not even for 10,000 thalers. Thaler was the silver German coin in the 18th and 19th century, something like $10 million or 100 whatever. You must not let them leave this country. It is for them we fought, said the general. Seferis makes a commentary in that Koliatsos was too sophisticated in his approach. I'm not sure that this is about sophistication. I think this is about the visceral connectedness with this. It is fundamental. It's not derived, it's fundamental. And the question is, today, do we have it to fight for these monuments, which you started addressing in the end of your point, and I appreciate that. And this goes back to Elizabeth's point in March on forgetting. Elizabeth put the big question of forgetting or neglecting. Of course, Hellenism has spread artifacts all over the world. Nowadays, Greece is threatened, is vulnerable for a number of reasons. And some people might say that the ethnic sentiment is diluted in the concept of European Union. Nothing wrong with the European Union. It is what it is. The diaspora is also diluted over successive generations and our children's prioritization of personal success and prosperity. Nothing wrong with personal success and prosperity, just fact. We may even be sleeping in the laurels of our ancestors. Homer, Sophocles, Vassilis the Great. By the way, I'm not even sure that many people today know what people are talking about. Or if they do, they love us more or they hate us more for that. It is actually increasingly tough to say. But it is not this kind of heritage that matters. It's the heritage that really calls on sacrifice. You can sacrifice your time, not necessarily your blood or something else. So the question is, what is going on today? Do we care? Are these monuments an integral part of our identity? As threatened, as diluted, or as dormant is maybe. All the while, other minorities in the world reassert identity, and rightly so. They reassert identity, even sometimes looking critically at history. So I would like you to comment, in fact, go back to the last point you both addressed, and tell me not so much about what others do or don't do. Utsumeni Sodre Azulei of UNESCO has lots and lots and lots of monuments to preserve around the world. We have only one. We have one Monihora. We have one at Ephesus and so on, these beautiful mosaics that Flora showed us. So what do we do, Elizabeth? What do we do currently, not in the future. What needs to be done? What do we do now? For both of you.
Okay, I have some notes here I want to share. I think you're talking about something that Vassilis mentioned as a kind of violence, and that is apathy and indifference. And so I think one of the real challenges is how to shake people up and how to avoid, if you're talking theologically, the sin of indifference. Because this indifference is a sin because it means not even acknowledging the existence of the other. If you're talking in terms of heritage, it's the destructive, corrosive, destructive effects of apathy. And so I put here some of the disciplines that people, or the professional spaces in which people may work that are related to heritage, but we may not see that as so obvious. So there are those who are archaeologists, art historians, etc. And there we can say intuitively we understand the connection with heritage. But how about the engineer? Think about the engineers, the engineering teams that have been working for decades on the structural sustainability of Hagia Sophia, or the engineers who went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and worked on the restoration of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Or the engineers, and here I'll talk about a recent success story that I've been involved with, the engineers who have worked on the restoration of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And we recently, last week, at the Museum of the Bible, launched the Bells of Bethlehem exhibit. I would encourage you all to go and see that. It's there for 6 months, where the bells from the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, which have never left Bethlehem, are now part of the display there. But the engineers who are working on the structural integrity and the restoration of that church have been involved. So engineers should be concerned with cultural heritage, or historians, who are the people who actually write, remember, or erase, or distort history. The project of writing of history is ultimately a political project. So if you're a historian, you should be interested in heritage, because it's about memory and forgetting, or remembering and changing, hopefully, the future. If you are a human rights expert or a religious freedom expert, how it is that heritage sites are places of gathering, places of religious practice, places of worship, or if you're a person who is interested in woodworking and handicrafts, or if you're a person who is interested in material culture, for example, tapestries, clothing, etc., these are part of heritage. And if you're a person who works in the private sector, you should be thinking about the sustainability of local communities, because sites are great and museums are great, but I don't think anyone in this room is interested in dead communities. They're interested in living, durable, growing, nurturing communities. And so if you're a person who works in the private sector, you can work on investment in those local communities. And even if, as some cynics say, private sector actors are doing that, just for their brand, whether it's for branding or whether it's for sincere purposes, investment in local communities helps to sustain the intangible with the tangible heritage. So I put that out there, and maybe if there's time, we can come back a little bit to some other success stories. Oh, one that I don't want to forget, the return of the manuscript to the Ikosiphinissa monastery in Drama. That's a late 10th century manuscript. The Ikosiphinissa monastery was attacked in 1917 by Bulgarian forces. Almost the entire collection of manuscripts was looted. Some of it remains in Sofia in Bulgaria, and other manuscripts have ended up in places like Princeton University, Duke University, and I was involved with the Museum of the Bible in the return of one of those manuscripts to the monastery last month. Heritage belongs with the people and places that it originated, but then can be shared universally. And those kinds of positive actions, those can be replicated, and they show that where there's goodwill, there can actually be good results. So look for success stories and get out of the fishbowl. For other people to care about Greek heritage, we need to care about others' heritage, because at the end of the day, an attack on the heritage of one is an attack on the heritage of all. And unless we learn that lesson, and if the pandemic hasn't taught us that we're all interconnected, then we should just end the conversation about heritage, because ultimately it's a conversation about humanity and human sustainability and survival. So I'll turn it over to you, Evangelos.
Actually, this is a perfect pass, because this is exactly the case. We have seen now recently, we have seen a lot of African countries that are claiming their heritage. A lot of the African colleagues that are in restitution committees have been learning from the Greek colleagues and the failures of the Greek colleagues, the successes of the Greek colleagues with the Parthenon marbles. So the debates are connected, the interests are connected, and there are many more people and many more friends out there for the protection of heritage internationally. So I continue with methodology a little bit, and thinking about what we can do in the future. I just want to state some of my personal ideas.
That would be a third question, but if you want, the idea is, what are we doing now? What's going on now? And then you'll tell us, because obviously we need your wisdom on that.
Well, at the moment, there are organizations like UNESCO or like ICROM. There are international conventions that have been voted, and usually most of these are in the realm of international law. And international law, those of you that know more than me, will tell you that is vague and difficult to apply. And most of these conventions in particular are without teeth. So there's a Hague Convention against destruction of heritage during war, where a defending country has to appoint specific sites that should not be attacked by any attacker. So this means that a country must predict that it might be attacked, and it must decide very quickly which sites to nominate. And if a site has not been nominated, it's a good target. And there are so many exemptions to that convention that basically it's null and void, because you cannot attack a previously designated site except if it has been used as a military depot, except if a target is being chased and hides in that site. And a decision must be taken by a very senior officer. But in the absence of a very senior officer, it can go all the way down to a lieutenant. So a lieutenant can actually attack a heritage site that has been previously designated by the country. And even if you violate that treaty, nothing happens. So really, at the moment, the international system is a system without teeth. And we saw that. All of you, a lot of you here are interested in Greek heritage. You have seen the debate around Hagia Sophia. You have seen how late UNESCO was in reacting to Hagia Sophia, and you saw how careful UNESCO was in not upsetting the authorities. And harsh words were not spoken, and Turkey is contributing to the UNESCO budget. For many years, the US was not contributing to the UNESCO budget. So we have no right to actually exercise any influence over UNESCO because we're not paying our bills. And so UNESCO is severely understaffed and has got more than 50% cut of its budget previous to the US decision of not paying its contribution. So basically, Turkey becomes a big contributor to UNESCO. And are you going to go against your donor? Unlikely. And we saw the same thing with Uzbekistan, by the way, which is a much smaller contributor to UNESCO. UNESCO still could not show its teeth to Uzbekistan. So we're not really talking about an international system that is actually really protective of heritage. And we must do something to actually tie countries in a stronger way and make that moral, because that's the only thing that the international system does at the moment, the moral punishment of countries stronger. So perhaps what we can do here as a society is to create an alliance of journalists for the shaming of countries that are destroying cultural heritage. And we must make sure that this alliance of journalists is not only talking about Greek heritage, but is also talking about Uzbeki heritage. Okay?
Very, very enlightening. I can think that if we don't pay our dues to UNESCO, and if UNESCO is toothless, we should not perhaps refer to UNESCO to solve the problem of the Sophia for us, which we have done.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So the topic now is, you both broached it, is action and adverts. I know you love to address this. Not what we are or are not doing today. We are not UNESCO. It's very clear from what you've told us that there's much to be desired, at the very least, but what needs to be done in the future? All three of our panelists have been involved in one way or another in advocacy and preservation of Greek and Christian monuments and other monuments around the world. That gets on a more international plane. I would like you both to say, perhaps if Flora, I don't know, our great electronic
Should be asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, she should be asleep.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure you can very valiantly take over here because you know what she would say. But anyway, you are both very much involved in this, so I'd like to hear as and to conclude the pilot side of the event tonight.
All right, so I can keep on chatting. Okay, so in order to take action, I just want to make some observations that I was about to make previously. But so first of all, heritage is not about stones. Okay, heritage is about stories that can be told with stones in presence. Okay, so this is one thing to think about. Second thing to think about is that much of the world is tired of listening to us saying that everything was invented by the Greeks. Okay, this is very tiring. And in fact, you don't make any friends by saying that. Third is that Greek heritage is not only Greek. Greek heritage, we want it or not, and I should say we want it, is very much part of the heritage of a big chunk of the world that is much greater than the West. So at the moment, as we speak, there is a very great number of traditional doctors in India that are called Greek doctors. We want it or not, this is Greek heritage, it's Indian heritage, and it connects us with that part of the world. So we really have to make sure that we understand that our heritage is their heritage. And this is a good thing. Okay. And of course, that history is, heritage is a great way to divide people. If you see all the wars and conflicts that have taken on in our memories, they have had a historic or heritage relation of some sort. Look at the war of Yugoslavia, look at the war in Ukraine, Look at the war in Vietnam. There is some heritage-related element, be it more recent or more old, okay? But heritage also unites. And so we are blessed in being Greek and therefore associating ourselves with a very diverse body of heritage, and to be able to choose and have the luxury to choose what heritage fits for us to connect with what people, okay? We can talk to Muslims about heritage. We can talk to Buddhists about heritage. We can talk to North Africans and East Africans around heritage. We can connect ourselves with slavery as part of our heritage, being occupied by an empire as part of our heritage. We can just pick and choose. So this is an incredible luxury. And so taking this into consideration, I would like to just offer a few ideas of what we might want to do in the future. The first is infrastructure. And I think this is something that this society can play a great role in. And what I mean by infrastructure is gathering and connecting people, bringing people together who work in diverse fields, and helping these people flourish while at the same time protecting them. Okay, so I was telling Elizabeth earlier on, there was only one expert in Byzantine architecture in Jordan. She's now in the US. Her husband has been killed, and she fled from Jordan in fear. Okay? Bad incident, you'd say bad luck, but there was only one. So if we could do something to protect her, make her feel better, make her feel safer in Jordan, in a very safe country otherwise, it would be good. There have been initiatives, like for example, the Greek Reporter has tried to kind of bring stories together. But again, don't forget, the Greek Reporter has its motto, Greeks are everywhere. I mean, this is scary. If I read that, I would just go and hide somewhere. You know, some Greek is going to go after me. So creating connections between experts is actually, helping research is actually really, really important. Maybe an award for good conservation, but a very open-minded one, very inclusive one, and one that actually celebrates the diversity of Greek heritage, not just Christian heritage. Perhaps make a watch list. This is how the World Monuments Fund started. This is how UNESCO's World Heritage List started. It started out as recording monuments and awarding good practice, okay? Because of the different priorities and the changing of the world, a lot of these initiatives have been basically left behind, or they have been diversified and therefore ultimately diluted. And they are very useful. They are very useful to continue as they are. But then this creates a new need for another watch list that is actually, raising awareness and is collaborating with local experts in all these different countries to raise awareness about their own heritage, which also happens to be Greek related, okay? And then help train those that are working with Greek heritage, because this is a problem that all heritage managers have. They come from the humanities, social sciences. They don't have the skills to manage heritage in general. This is not a problem that Greece has or Malawi has. It's a problem that the US has. Look at the Metropolitan Museum. They are people who are art historians. They are people who are archaeologists. What do they know about managing people or managing budgets? What do they know about strategic planning? What do they know about creating visitor experience? What do they know about communications? What do they know about engaging with new audiences? And so on and so forth. So we really need to train these people who are looking after heritage, who are looking after our identity and what makes us proud, and we should help them look after that heritage that is also theirs. So I'll shut up there.
Thanks so much.
I'll just add some footnotes. Yeah, I'll just add some footnotes to what you said, Vassilis. And I'll go quickly through the list. What can we do? First of all, change our mindset. Don't see heritage as something of the past and something dead. Heritage is continuous, and it should be something of the present and future. So to quote my daughter who's here, get some agency, okay, and reframe the way we think about heritage. Because otherwise, heritage will be something that's of the past, and it will be dead. And I go to Vassilis, your point about identity. Think about identity as something that is continuously sustained and recreated. The second thing I would say is don't deal in abstractions. If we're thinking about heritage, we've touched on things like sites. We touched on things like monuments and churches, but I would say to think a little more broadly about libraries, about museums, about music, etc., and then go and see. Don't remain at the abstract level, but actually, as much as, if your economic means a value of it, and we don't need to travel anymore physically, we can use technology. See, so that these things are not just ideas and abstractions. There's nothing more moving to action than to actually visit a site or to see a site. I would say also learn to hold accountable those who are meant to be responsible. And I think, Vassilis, you underscored so beautifully the fact that in general, international institutions are toothless. They don't have a lot of compliance mechanisms, and they don't impose penalties. But still, enforcement and compliance. But we can try to hold them accountable, at least publicly. So even in a case like UNESCO, which is instructive, after the declaration of Hagia Sophia and the reconversion of Hagia Sophia to a mosque, Turkey was reappointed to the executive committee of UNESCO for another term, multi-year term. And why? Because they are major economic contributors. So it does come down to funding in a lot of cases and money. But hold those institutions accountable. You can't talk the talk and not walk the walk. But it's not only UNESCO, it's other international institutions. And I would also say to hold private collectors accountable, hold museums accountable, and hold universities accountable. I mentioned a couple who hold manuscripts from the Ikosiphinissa monastery. Hold them accountable to abide by international law. And if it's not a legal question, it's a normative and a moral question, as you said, Vassilis. So hold them accountable. And one of the ways to do that is to use voice and also to use the media. And then I would also say at the bilateral level, things that can be done, because we're here in the United States, some very specific things. Recognize the intersectionality of heritage with religious freedom, with human rights. In 2025, it'll be the 5 years of the signing of the bilateral cultural heritage agreement between the United States and Turkey. That means in the lead up to 2025, that's going to be renegotiated. So make sure that the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, which is responsible for negotiating that agreement, that the actual specifics of cultural heritage agreements are actually abided by. And that means ensuring that the local communities inside Turkey that are affected by that actually are engaged in terms of the renegotiation of the particulars of the agreement. And there's someone in the room who's a bilateral heritage agreement expert. She might be someone to whom you can ask your questions. But so to hold people, states accountable, and ultimately to use the kind of imagination that Vassilis has been talking about. I've talked about multi-sectoral, multi-professional stakeholders in heritage preservation and sustainability. And Vassilis, you're talking about best practices and engaging with local communities and use the imagination to recognize who are those local communities who should and want to be invested in what we may consider Greek heritage, but is also world heritage and universal heritage. So to use some imagination, that's the last thing I think we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, really. We covered so much. We were a little late, but I would like to open it for some questions. If you perhaps, Sophia will pass around the microphone. More than happy to introduce that.
You want this microphone? Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question on the topic of accountability, because I know that in certain parts of the world, there are certain mechanisms that I know Greece has not, replicated or used. Like in Italy, they have the Karagianni, the culturale. New York has the district attorney's office with Bogdanov's unit that deals in antiquities trafficking. Find examples all over the world of people who specialize in these things. You have Professor Kyriakides, who's a forensic archaeologist. You have Donna Yates. You have all these people who are out there and who are trained and who have the skill sets. But you don't see that many opportunities. Like, I know that there is interest out there. You mentioned, people being detached from their heritage, but I have a master's in cultural heritage studies. And there was a job I applied to at the district attorney's office where 400 people applied. So there are people out there who are invested, who are interested, but I just don't think there are enough opportunities. So what do you think can be done? I know that a lot of museums, a lot of institutions, they depend a lot on paid labor, which I think deters a lot of people from the field. So what do you think is the step forward for that?
So this is my personal view, and obviously it's not an institutional view of anyone. Yeah. First of all, Greece actually does have a unit, but it's very small, and it's underfunded. And it has worked in two different eras. Now is the second era, but there was a first era, which was in the Karamanlis government when Vulgarakis was the culture minister. And he previously was Minister of Interior. So the main contribution that this guy had was he created the police unit that treated looting as a crime. And obviously the Carabinieri are the world model of what is good practice in this field. And there have been collaborations between Greek authorities and Italian authorities for this, as there are collaborations between Greek authorities and Israeli authorities on this. And there are two things to be done. The first thing is to be very clear in our understanding that the looting of artifacts is following the same routes as guns and drugs. So as soon as we realize that, we will very quickly understand how important it is to chase art crime, okay? Because this is one very important thing. So we need more research, because at the moment there are very few researchers in the world. In fact, one of them is in our organization. But this person and many others who are researchers have been denigrated constantly, not only by the big families or the big interests that are behind drugs, guns, or art, but also by governments, okay? So this is first, because once we start realizing that washing guns and drugs through art is something that happens a lot, then we will start realizing that we need to invest more in it. And the second thing is investment in it. And so investment in it does not have to be only state. A lot of the jobs, like what Christos Tsirogiannis is doing, a lot of the relevant jobs can be done by the private sector, can be done by charities, can be done by NGOs, can be done by volunteers. For example, we would be very happy to train people on how to do this research, but we're not a volunteer organization, meaning we cannot manage volunteers, but we can train the volunteers of another organization in doing these things. So this is not something that states are wholly responsible for, and because we're in a country where they don't believe very much in states, this is actually a good place to say that. Actually, civil society has a huge role to play in this.
Can I just, yeah. Just a quick follow-up. I think your point about the mapping on of trafficking in small weapons, in narcotics, and in and hard crime, and in components of WMD, that reinforces my point that we need to take a different approach to thinking about who can be involved in heritage. Because if you're working for Europol, if you're working for Interpol, if you're somebody who's doing counterterrorism work, if you're somebody who's working on trying to stop narcotics trafficking, you need to think about the connections to heritage. And if you think about what's gone on, for example, with the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the trafficking in our Armenian Kashgars, for example, I mean, that's following the same routes as narcotics and weapons trafficking from the space of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan into the Mediterranean basin. So again, think with a little bit more imagination about what are the professional spaces, and if you can do something from your own professional space when it comes to heritage. I'll leave it at that for now. Oh, and also, I would like to, one professional space we haven't touched on, that's the people who work in digitization. And huge projects, for example, the digitization of the collection at St. Catherine's and Mount Sinai. There's a digitization project that's going to be underway with the Monastery of the Holy Cross in part of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, as they're beginning to inventory their collection, and they'll move to digitize it. There's the digitization of the collection at Halki. So those people who work in that space, again, they don't necessarily think about heritage. We need to think more actively and encourage those kinds of connections and get those stakeholders invested in heritage protection and preservation.
Yeah, I have to make a point there, and it's not that they are amply funded, because I believe the point here is very important, is that there is sensitivity of the public coming from grassroots, but there's not so much interest from the top. And many of those initiatives, we worked with SPGH in 2005 at the Monastery of St. Catherine's, and Father Justin was actually thinking about starting this back then, but it's Father Justin. I wonder how many Father Justins are willing to do this without a lot of government intervention. Government services elsewhere, they're in our loop. Generally.
Thank you both for your time. I have a question for both of you. You both spoke about the private sector briefly and the role the private sector can play in cultural heritage. And I work in the private sector, and I immediately thought of the invasion of Ukraine and how companies very quickly, because of reputational risks, which are now fiscal risks, they're inextricably linked, left Russia. And I think a big part of that was because it was sort of just the accepted social understanding that that was the right thing to do, that was the ethical thing to do. And obviously you both spoke about the ethical importance of cultural heritage and how we need to be thinking about these ethics, but it seems like people are not taking the same sort of action and making the same sort of bold moves to say, end operations in places that have a really poor track record when it comes to cultural heritage. So how can we, as a general group that works in a variety of industries, make cultural heritage something that's appealing in that way for private sector people, say? How can we contextualize it for them and make it a worthwhile commodity to be changing their operations over or altering their sort of long-term strategy? How can we make it, and I know I don't need to devalue it and commodify it, but at the same time, since we live in like a commodity-based economy and that's how so many things function, I think it's important to think about it in those operational terms.
Okay, I don't know if I will be answering your question directly, so if I'm not, tell me. First of all, actually in Ukraine, what we saw was that there was a tremendous private sector reaction to the war in Ukraine. I'm quite close to an organization called ALIF, which is a French-Arab initiative protecting heritage in areas of conflict. ALIF, in the first week, got 3 million from the European Union and has a general director who is actually Polish. So there was a lot of interest from the top. And they have conducted up to now 150 restoration projects in Ukraine, which is phenomenal. In fact, they've done 150 restoration projects in the rest of the world until today, and another 150 projects in Ukraine during that time. And they're not alone. There are a lot of other organizations, less successful, but a lot of reaction to this. Okay, so that's part of the question. The second is that actually heritage is really essential for economic activity. And everybody thinks of tourism, which is the obvious thing, but actually tourism is not the only thing that is affected by heritage. First of all, let me just make one bold statement. Heritage is everything, because the past is everything. The present is a flimsy line that is escaping us, and there is no future yet. So everything is based on the past, and heritage is what is crystallized from the past. So it's actually obvious that heritage is relevant to everything, okay? So economic activity. Usually people think of heritage as a boost for tourism. Some institutions think about creative industries as related to heritage. I would encourage people to think around sectoral branding when it comes to heritage. For example, food and drink is directly related to heritage, but even finance is related to heritage. I mean, why would you go to New York to do finance? It's partly because there is a brand around the city that's a great financial center. Why would you go to London to do this? Because of the heritage of London in the financial sector. So actually, heritage is very related to the ideas that the world has about itself. And so therefore, it's very related to branding. And so I think these are all to do with private interests, not only state interests, because actually heritage is about private people, really, individuals. Did I answer your question? No? Yeah? Okay.
I think this should be the last question, so we can wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for...
Thanks for the great audience. Thanks for this very difficult and multidimensional and complex at many levels issue. It's to be continued, obviously. We're a heritage society. You are involved in heritage. We should really do more of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.